The chandeliers of the Lancaster Country Club sparkled like frozen stars. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, clutching a champagne flute I didn't even want. The air smelled faintly of roses and expensive perfume. Everywhere I looked, people moved with ease, laughing, shaking hands, clinking glasses. People who belonged. I didn't. I was 28, an artist who sold handmade pieces through a small studio. My dress, though elegant, was borrowed. I shifted uncomfortably, wishing I could disappear into the floor. And then Victoria Lancaster, my mother-in-law, spotted me. She glided toward me with that perfect poise that came from years of being untouchable. Her diamonds caught the light as she slipped one hand around my arm and drew me into a circle of wealthy donors. "Everyone," she said sweetly, her voice carrying across the group. "This is my son's wife. She runs a little arts and crafts business. Isn't that precious?" The donors chuckled politely. Heat flushed my face. Before I could recover, she added with a laugh, "And we've decided to make her the creative director of our family foundation. She'll be in charge of flower arrangements and party decor." The group laughed again, louder this time. My stomach twisted, and then I heard it, the laugh that hurt most of all. Jordan's, my husband. He stood across the circle, smiling and chuckling along with the joke. As if my humiliation was funny, I swallowed hard, forcing a polite smile. Inside, I was crumbling. But as their laughter echoed in my ears, a quiet promise formed in my heart. I will never forget this. That night, after the gala, I finally let the mask slip. In our bedroom, I turned to Jordan. My voice shook as I said, "Your mother humiliated me in front of everyone tonight. She made me feel like a child." Jordan didn't look up from his phone. "That's just Mom," he said. "She's tough, but she means well. This is your chance to prove yourself to the family." I stared at him, shocked. Prove myself? By being mocked. He sighed, setting his phone down. "Don't take it so personally. You'll get used to her. Get used to her." As if humiliation was supposed to be part of the marriage package. I turned away, blinking back tears. I had expected him to comfort me, to stand by me, to remind me that I mattered. Instead, he had defended her. As he drifted asleep beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Something cold settled in my chest. If I wanted respect in this family, I would have to claim it myself. And so the first ember of anger began to burn. The next morning, I climbed into the attic. Dust swirled in the sunlight like tiny ghosts. Up here, away from Victoria's voice and Jordan's indifference, I could breathe again. The boxes stacked high belonged to my grandmother, a preservationist and artist. She had passed away years ago, leaving me her sketches, letters, and journals. I began scanning them into my computer, page by page, letting the familiar smell of old paper calm me. As I flipped through brittle pages, I felt her presence guiding me. My grandmother had always fought for truth, restoring old buildings others wanted torn down. She had believed history mattered, even when it was inconvenient. One sketchbook caught my eye. The lines were bold, deliberate, columns, sprawling lawns, intricate windows. My breath caught in my throat. It was a mansion, and not just any mansion. I knew those pillars, those windows. I had walked past them dozens of times. It was the Lancaster estate. I studied the sketches late into the night. My grandmother had drawn the estate in obsessive detail, every gable, every shadow. In the margins, she had scribbled notes, names, and dates from the 1950s. Why? Why had she drawn Victoria's family home? That night, I dreamed of the mansion. Its walls loomed over me, shadows dripping from the windows like secrets. I woke in a sweat, my heart racing. The next morning, I returned to the boxes. My grandmother's sketches weren't just drawings. They were pieces of a story, one that had been hidden for decades. And I was about to uncover it. At the bottom of one box, I found a bundle of letters tied with a fraying ribbon. The handwriting was elegant, slanted. The letters were addressed to my grandmother from someone named Genevieve. I untied the ribbon, my fingers trembling. Genevieve's words spilled across the pages in ink that had faded with time but not with pain. She wrote of her family's heartbreak, their home stolen in a fraudulent legal battle. She described forged documents, shell companies, and betrayal that stripped them of everything they had. The house she described matched my grandmother's sketches. And the dates, they lined up perfectly. My stomach dropped. The Lancaster estate, the pride of Victoria's family, had once belonged to Genevieve's, and it had been taken through fraud. Everything Victoria flaunted, every gala she hosted, every ounce of her pride was built on theft. I couldn't let it go. For days I sat at my laptop, cross-referencing names, addresses, company records. My desk was filled with printouts and scribbled notes. My coffee went cold as I fell down rabbit holes of archives. And then I found it. The deeds. Victoria's grandfather had used shell companies and forged signatures to seize Genevieve's family estate. Bribes had been paid. Judges had been corrupted. It was all there, buried in the records. The Lancasters' entire empire, every gala and every donation, every ounce of legacy, had been built on stolen ground. I leaned back in my chair, my pulse pounding. My humiliation at the gala suddenly seemed trivial compared to this. Victoria had paraded her legacy before me, but her family's wealth was soaked in lies. And now I have the proof. That evening, I laid the documents on our dining table. My hands trembled as I pushed them toward Jordan. "Your family built their wealth on a crime," I said, my voice shaking. "This house, your estate, was stolen." Jordan picked up the papers, skimming through them. His face drained of color. For a moment, I thought he might share my outrage. That maybe, finally, he would stand beside me. Instead, he whispered, "You can't tell anyone. This would destroy us. It's ancient history. Forget it." I stared at him. "Forget it? Families lost everything, Jordan. Don't you care?" His voice hardened. "I care about my family. You'll do nothing. For us." Those two words, "for us," shattered whatever hope I had left in our marriage. That night, as he rolled over and fell asleep, I sat awake, staring into the darkness. My marriage was built on lies, just like the Lancaster fortune. The next morning, I called Richard, an old friend of my grandmother's and a lawyer who had spent years handling property cases. He studied the documents carefully, his brow furrowed. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and said, "This case is too old for the courts. The statute of limitations has long passed." My heart sank. "So there's nothing I can do?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "Don't mistake that for powerlessness. Legally, yes, the case is closed. But reputationally, if this story comes to light, it will destroy them. Their foundation thrives on an image of integrity. That image is their crown jewel. You have the power to shatter it." I swallowed hard. "And the risks?" He steepled his fingers. "They'll fight back. Hard. You're poking a very powerful family. If you do this, you'll make enemies." I sat in silence, his words ringing in my ears. My fingers brushed the edges of Genevieve's letters in my bag. I could feel her grief echoing across decades. The truth could destroy them. But if I stayed silent, the lies would live forever. Back in the attic, I dug deeper into the boxes. That's when I found it, a yellowed newspaper clipping tucked between my grandmother's journals. It was Genevieve's obituary. My breath caught as I read. She had left behind a trust, a fund designed to one day restore the stolen estate and transform it into an art center for the community. The trust would activate 70 years after her family's loss. That time was now. I sat back, stunned. Genevieve hadn't just written letters of sorrow. She had planned for the truth to rise again. Tears blurred my vision as I clutched the clipping. Suddenly, this wasn't only about revenge or humiliation. It was about justice. Justice for Genevieve. Justice for my grandmother, who had preserved these records for me to find. And justice for every young artist who deserved a chance to create. I knew what I had to do. I gathered copies of the documents and drove to Victoria's mansion. Her house gleamed with the same arrogance she carried everywhere. She welcomed me with a practiced smile, one that faltered when she saw the papers in my hand. "I know the truth," I said, laying the documents on her pristine marble table. "Your family stole this estate. Genevieve left a trust to make things right. You could support it, restore what was stolen, turn your foundation into something real." Victoria's eyes scanned the papers before she threw back her head and laughed, a sharp, cruel laugh. "You foolish girl," she sneered. "Do you really think you can threaten me with dusty papers? No one will believe you. And if you try, I'll make sure your little art career is nothing but ashes." Her eyes glinted with malice. "You'll regret crossing me." I gathered the documents calmly, forcing myself to meet her gaze. She thought she had scared me. She thought I was weak. But in that moment, her arrogance lit a fire inside me. As I walked out of her mansion, my heart hammered in my chest. Her laugh still echoed in my ears, but instead of fear, I felt something different. Clarity. She loved her family's reputation more than anything else. That was her pride, her weapon, her shield. And I would use it against her. She had humiliated me in front of the city. Now I would return the favor, only bigger. And not just for me. For Genevieve. For my grandmother. For the truth. My revenge would not be loud or reckless. It would be precise, devastating, and permanent. To Jordan and Victoria, I play the part of the obedient wife. "I've decided to move on," I told them one evening, smiling sweetly. "I'm working on a little history project. Nothing serious." Jordan relaxed, relief softening his face. Victoria gave me a smug look of approval. They believed they had won. But behind closed doors, I was crafting their downfall. I poured myself into research, writing an academic paper backed with every letter, sketch, and deed I had uncovered. To give it credibility, I partnered with a respected history society, framing it as a study of forgotten estates and their true origins. Victoria thought she had silenced me. In truth, I was sharpening my blade. Then the acceptance email came. My paper had been selected for presentation at a national history conference. When I read the email with my scheduled presentation time, I nearly laughed out loud. My lecture had been set for the same evening as Victoria's biggest gala of the year, the night she would parade the Lancaster legacy in front of the city's elite. It was poetic. While she lifted her glass to toast her heritage, I would be across town, dismantling it brick by brick. I could almost see it already, her smile freezing mid-speech as the headlines broke, her empire unraveling in real time. Let her smile while she still can, I whispered to myself. The night of the lecture arrived. The History Society's auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Rows of historians, journalists, and donors filled the seats. Cameras clicked as reporters whispered to each other, sensing a big story. I sat backstage, my grandmother's drawings neatly arranged in a folder, Genevieve's letters carefully protected in plastic sleeves. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with purpose. Across town, the Lancaster gala glittered. Champagne fountains sparkled. Guests in diamonds and tuxedos raised their glasses. Victoria beamed on stage, basking in the glow of her perfect image. But that glow wouldn't last long. When my name was called, I stepped onto the stage. The lights blinded me for a moment, but then I found my voice. "This," I said, projecting a sketch onto the screen behind me, "is a story about a house, a family, and a legacy built on lies." Gasps rippled through the room. The audience leaned forward as my grandmother's elegant sketch of the estate filled the screen. "This estate," I explained, "is one many of you may recognize. But it was not always theirs. It was taken, stolen from its rightful owners." I laid out Genevieve's letters, her grief etched into every line. Then I unveiled the deeds, the forged signatures, the shell companies, the false witnesses. The silence was thick, broken only by the furious scratching of journalists' pens. Then a voice called from the back, "Isn't that the Lancaster estate?" The room erupted with murmurs. I paused, letting the question hang before answering. The documents speak for themselves. At that very moment, the lecture's live stream flickered onto the massive screen at Victoria's gala. At the gala, guests froze, champagne flutes halfway to their lips. Victoria turned in confusion as my voice filled the room. This estate was stolen. The legacy built upon it fraudulent. Her smile stiffened. She gestured frantically to the staff, but it was too late. The stream had already been shared online. Guests pulled out their phones, recording, tweeting, whispering. Meanwhile, in the lecture hall, I clicked through slides. Documents, sketches, court filings, each piece stacked on the last like an avalanche, impossible to stop. A journalist leaned to his colleague and whispered, "This could blow the Lancasters apart." I met his gaze and said clearly, "History remembers the truth, no matter how long it takes to rise." Across town, Victoria's gala collapsed in chaos. Guests whispered in shock. Donors quietly slipped out. The sparkle of the champagne fountain seemed absurd now, a grotesque backdrop to the unraveling of her family's story. Victoria stood on stage, her smile frozen, as her guests turned their eyes from admiration to suspicion. Her staff scrambled to shut down the feed, but the damage was done. Phones lit up across the hall. Headlines flashed. Lancaster legacy questioned. Stolen estate exposed. Fraud at the heart of the family fortune. Back in the lecture hall, a reporter stood and asked directly, "Are you confirming this is the Lancaster family?" I steadied my voice. "The facts point where they point. Draw your own conclusions." The room exploded with questions. Cameras flashed. The story was alive. By midnight, every major outlet had the story. Headlines blazed. Lancaster fortune built on stolen land. Charity empire in question. At the gala, the glitter faded to ash. Donors canceled checks. Sponsors withdrew overnight. By morning, government auditors were knocking at the Lancaster Foundation's doors. Victoria locked herself in her office. The woman who once humiliated me with effortless cruelty now sat in silence, her phone buzzing with calls she couldn't answer. Her empire was collapsing, and I had only just begun to breathe freely again. 2 days later, I heard a knock at my studio door. When I opened it, I barely recognized her. Gone were the pearls, the flawless hair, the queen-like posture. Victoria stood before me with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of her name had finally crushed her. "You have to fix this," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, name your price. I'll give you anything. Money, influence, whatever you want." I stared at her. This was the same woman who had once paraded me like a fool in front of donors, who had laughed at me and called my work cute. Now she was begging. For the first time, she realized she wasn't in control. I let the silence stretch until I could feel her desperation pressing against me. Then I said, slowly, "I don't want your money. I don't want your influence. The truth isn't for sale." Her lips trembled. For a moment, I thought she might scream. Instead, she whispered, "You've destroyed everything." I stepped aside and opened the studio door. "No, Victoria, you destroyed it yourself. I just turned on the lights." She stumbled out, shrinking into the street as if the very world had turned its back on her. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Investigations launched into the Lancaster Foundation's finances. Donors vanished overnight. The once revered family name became a headline synonymous with scandal. Jordan grew colder by the day, his anger simmering just below the surface. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he snapped one evening. "Yes," I said evenly. "I told the truth." He had no response. Then one morning, a letter arrived with an embossed seal. I opened it, my hands trembling. It was an invitation from the trustees of Genevieve's fund. The meeting felt surreal. Lawyers confirmed that Genevieve's trust had matured into millions. Her vision was clear. The stolen estate would be restored and transformed into an art center, a place where young creators could thrive. They asked me to help oversee the restoration. My throat tightened. I thought of my grandmother's sketches, the hours I'd spent alone in the attic, and the grief woven into Genevieve's letters. "Yes," I whispered. "I'll do it." Months later, the estate's grand doors opened again, not as the Lancaster's monument, but as a sanctuary for artists. Children's laughter and brush strokes of paint filled the halls where lies once reigned. Justice had finally taken root in the soil of their stolen land. By then, my marriage was little more than silence. Jordan avoided my eyes, bitterness etched into every word he spoke. Deep down, I knew the truth. He wasn't angry at me. He was angry at himself for never having the courage to stand up to his family. When the divorce papers came, I signed them with steady hands. There were no tears, only relief. I slid the wedding ring from my finger, placed it on the table, and whispered, "I choose myself now." For the first time in years, the weight of his family's shadow lifted. I founded an organization in my grandmother's name, dedicated to supporting young artists. Every grant I awarded, every exhibition I hosted, felt like a piece of healing. For me, for Genevieve, for my grandmother. Reporters often asked me about the Lancasters. I never gloated. I never mocked. I simply told them, the truth always finds its way. Because it wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about building something honest out of the ruins of lies. Still, one final question lingered. Did I regret what I had done? During an interview, a journalist leaned forward. "Do you ever regret exposing your mother-in-law's family?" I looked straight into the camera, my voice steady. "My mother-in-law always wanted to be famous," I said. "Now she is, just not the way she hoped." The revenge was complete.